Hello and welcome to our presentation about the Austin Emergency Disinformation Campaign that happened on Twitter in January 2020. My name is Tobias Keller and I present this study also on behalf of my co-authors Timothy Graham, Daniel Angus, and Axel Bruns. The bushfires in Australia in 2019 and 2020 have been more severe due to climate change. The link between the extremes of the bushfires and climate change is scientifically undisputable, and climate change does not create bushfires, but it can and does make them worse. However, climate deniers started what appeared to be a disinformation campaign on Twitter. Timothy saw that suddenly a hashtag popped up often in discourses about the link between bushfires and climate change, and it seemed that suspicious account continuously tweeted that Australia has an arson problem, even an arson emergency, and not a climate change emergency. Therefore, Tim, Axel, Dan, and I started to dig deeper and asked two questions. What is the history of this hashtag, and do bots and trolls spread this hashtag? So what are social bots and troll bots? Social bots are defined as semi-automated computer programs that potentially mimic and manipulate humans and human behavior on social media platforms. Troll bots, on the other hand, are accounts that can be defined as accounts that are controlled by one or multiple humans who exhibit troll and bot-like behavior. As many of you are aware, studying bots and trolls has several issues. We don't know the ground truth, we lack a lot of data, and even the best tools have a false positive problem. So keep these limitations in mind. For our study, we collected all tweets with the hashtag #AustinEmergency, and to compare the number of bots and trolls contributing to this hashtag, we also collected tweets with the hashtag #BushfireAustralia and #AustraliaFire for the same period. To answer research question 1, we conducted a lot of manual analysis of each tweet, of each news article, and key actors spreading the idea of an Austin emergency. We also compared these results to Google Trends, and to answer research question 2, we used free bot and troll detection tools. So what is the history of the Austin emergency hashtag? We found 4 key elements. First, this season's bushfires have been extreme. People wanted to know who is to blame. Second, the Sydney Morning Herald published an article with a misleading title that said 87% of fires are man-made. And third, climate deniers started to use this headline as proof that arsonists are the primary problem and not climate change. That is, they tried to change the narrative about bushfires. When people speak about the bushfires, they had to associate it with arsonists and not with climate change. And fourth, this narrative was amplified by the newspaper The Australian, Donald Trump Jr., and some other influential voices. Now, who's spreading the hashtag on Twitter? When we look at the results of Botometer, we see that accounts that tweeted about Austin emergency were as human-like as accounts that tweeted about Bushfire Australia and Australia Fire. So fully automated accounts do not contribute much. When we look at the results of Bot Sentinel, who specialized on troll bots, we see that accounts behaved like troll bots who contributed to Austin emergency more often than to other hashtags. So we can say that a lot of troll bots amplified this hashtag. So what do we know about this disinformation campaign? We have evidence that the Austin emergency hashtag was used as a counter-narrative. They tried to persuade others that they should focus on arsonists and not climate change when talking about the bushfires. News with headlines like 87% of fires are man-made were decontextualized and misused for disinformation. We found that more trolls or troll bots than bots spread this hashtag. And finally, to understand this hashtag, we have to understand that climate change is a global issue, and climate deniers around the world unite on social media and try to change the narrative. We thank everyone who made this research possible, and thank you for your attention.
Hi, my name is Naima Marshall, and I'm joined today by my colleague.
Hi, I'm Lisa Maria Neudert from the Oxford Internet Institute. And we are presenting to you a short study that we did on investigating visual media that was shared over Twitter during the 2019 European Parliament elections. So basically going into this, we were interested to see what types of visual media are users sharing, how does that differ across different conversations with varying degrees of contention, and then also what are most important themes. So in order to do this, we had 84 hashtags, collected lots and lots of tweets, and then ended up coding over 1,000 images that came from tweets in 6 languages. We focused on 2 types of conversations. The first one was about the 2019 EU elections in general, and the other one, the more controversial one, was about topics around exiting the EU. And then we performed a content analysis of the visuals that were being shared and a thematic analysis.
When it came to our content analysis, we took a grounded approach to classifying the images. We focused first on the format, so trying to identify whether the images themselves corresponded to pictures or infographics, whether they were campaign posters. And then in the second time, we looked at the mode of communication, so more focusing on the apparent provenance of these images. Some of them were official campaigning material, sometimes they came from satellite groups, some of them were political humor, others were simple selfies at the ballot, and then we performed the thematic analysis as well to identify what were the main narratives that were conveyed in these different types of images. And there were 3 main findings that stuck up. The first one was that visuals that across both conversations tended to originate mostly from traditional political actors. That is, that the bulk of them corresponded to official campaigning material, and that was true for the 2 conversations we looked at. The second finding was that nevertheless, users tended to share quite substantial amounts of anti-European populist and extremist images. This is what became apparent from our thematic analysis, but this content was mostly confined to the conversation about exiting the EU and was therefore disjointed from the mainstream public debate. And then lastly, through analysis, political humor really emerged as a vector of anti-establishment and Eurosceptic themes, especially in conversations that were critical of the EU. So that's it for our 3 main findings for our study. Thanks for listening. You can find the extended abstract on the website with our panel. And if you have any questions about the content of this presentation, you can always email us or send us a tweet. Our DMs are open and our addresses are here. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rolf Nijmeijer, and I'm a PhD student at Luis Guido Carli University in Rome, Italy. Today I will present a short overview of a research project that I am conducting in cooperation with Christopher Nielbo, Marie Demgaard Mortensen, and Enya Beckman, all from Aarhus University in Denmark, and to whom I apologize for mispronouncing their names just now. This project is still a work in progress, so this presentation is more focused on the research design rather than actual findings. This particular project aims to identify if and how targeted advertising has been used in political Facebook advertisements for the 2019 European elections. Facebook's user data and the potential use thereof in reaching specific audiences with very specific advertisements has become salient over the past few years, especially after the 2016 US elections and the Cambridge Analytica scandal. However, the extent to which targeted advertisement has been used in recent elections remains a rather elusive phenomenon. It is the objective of this paper to identify deviant semantics, if any, between micro-targeting Facebook advertisements from different European countries. Major differences between the content of advertisements used by the same entities may be indicative of micro-targeting, and research has shown that the spread of deliberately false narratives through social media is observed more among political parties on the far right of the spectrum. So it is the assumption of this study that there will be an observable semantic distance between micro-targeting Facebook advertising campaigns used in 2019 elections, where far-right politicians and/or parties are the most divergent. The dataset used in this project comprises roughly 180 gigabytes of Facebook advertisement data, which comprises all 28 European member states involved in 2019 election, including the United Kingdom. So they are all present in the data. The advertisement data includes, among others, the textual content of the advertisement, the entity that paid for the advertisement, the entity that posted the advertisement, as well as the age, sex, and the region of the people who've been exposed to the advertisement. Since we found that not every advertisement included in the dataset is relevant for the 2019 EU elections, we filtered the advertisement on the keyword your asterisk applied to the ad creative body, that is, the actual text of the advertisement. For example, for Denmark, this reduced the data from 7.6 gigabytes and about 1.7 million entries to 1.3 gigabytes and about 162,000 entries. The methodology applied to this data involves several steps. The first step is linking the remaining advertisements to political leaning when possible. In some cases, the funding and posting entities cannot be directly linked to politicians, political parties, or political groups. For the cases in which this is possible, the advertisements are marked as belonging to their respective political group using official candidate lists for the 2019 EU elections, and they are placed on the left, center, right spectrum using the Chapel Hill expert survey. The next steps involve textual analysis to identify differences between the creative bodies of the advertisements. This will be done in Python using word count factorization, term frequency inverse document frequency, document clustering, paragraph embedding, and well, that's it. These different levels of analysis should give a comprehensive overview of any potential textual deviations within the advertisements and the political entities that use them. This is done for each EU member state individually to avoid distortion of the results through linguistic differences. The respective results will be compared to identify any major differences in the use of political micro-targeting on Facebook across Europe. We expect that political parties will use Facebook's potential for micro-targeting to present advertisements to different people. This means that there will be significant semantic variation between advertisements bought by the same political entities at the same time. Potentially significant variations may emerge in advertisements bought by individual candidates in order to stand out from their colleagues and to strengthen their profile in certain regions and/or demographics. As mentioned before, we expect this phenomenon to be strongest among right-wing parties. In case of evidence of significant deviant semantics, a follow-up study taking into account the exact regions and demographics linked to these advertisements will be a logical next step. Thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have.
Hi, I'm Patrizia Rossini, a Derby Fellow in the Department of Communication at the University of Liverpool, here to present Explaining Dysfunctional Information Sharing on WhatsApp and Facebook in Brazil, a paper I co-authored with Jenny Stromer-Galley, Vanessa de Oliveira, and Erika Batista. In this paper, we focus on WhatsApp because it is the second largest social network / messaging app in Brazil, second only to Facebook. WhatsApp has been increasingly used for news in Brazil, but also in other countries in the global south, and that is in spite of being a messaging app with no formal presence of media outlets and etc., which makes it a very good place for people to share misinformation and for misinformation to spread. So what we are trying to do in this paper is understand a bit more of what explains the behavior of engaging with misinformation in these platforms. Our first hypothesis is that frequency of political talk in both Facebook and WhatsApp will be positively associated with sharing misinformation by accident on platform, and that's really just about people who are very active being also the ones who would share misinformation. But we also ask if frequency of political talk would be associated with sharing misinformation on purpose, that is, sharing something you know it's fake. We also ask to what extent exposure to disagreement explains engagement with misinformation, both accidentally and on purpose. And lastly, we have a set of questions about social correction. So asking if experiencing a social correction, witnessing a social correction, or performing a social correction would affect the likelihood of posting misinformation, both accidentally and on purpose. Our last bit is a question about platforms. So if there are any differences between Facebook and WhatsApp in terms of people experiencing, witnessing, or performing a social correction. For methods, we used a survey combining online panels and phone interviews. We had quotas for gender, age, education, and region. And our main DV is sharing misinformation. And for the analysis, we just used 4 logistic regression models predicting accidental misinformation sharing on Facebook and WhatsApp and purposeful misinformation sharing also in both platforms. So for the first question, accidental misinformation sharing About a third of our participants acknowledge having done that. And for sharing misinformation on purpose, just about 15%, with no really significant differences between platforms. We found that frequency of political talk was positively associated with sharing misinformation accidentally in both platforms. We also found cross-platform effects when it comes to purposeful misinformation sharing. So if you talk a lot about politics on Facebook, you share misinformation on purpose on WhatsApp and vice versa. We find exposure to disagreement predicts also both types of dysfunctional sharing, and that effect was stronger for purposeful sharing. And finally, we find that dysfunctional sharing was positively associated with experiencing a social correction, and the same was true for witnessing social corrections, at least on Facebook in the second case. In terms of platform effects, we find that respondents were significantly more likely to experience, perform, and witness social corrections on WhatsApp than on Facebook. So as a key takeaway, we find a participation paradox, so desirable things such as talking about politics and seeing a lot of disagreement online are associated with dysfunctional misinformation sharing. But on the flip side, we also find that misinformation does not go unnoticed. So people who shared things that were fake are likely to be called out by their peers, and that is particularly so if they are on WhatsApp, where mainly communication is kind of private and among closer ties. That's all I have time for. This paper is now out, so if you need it, just hit me up and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.